was the design of Angelo Ricci, Joe Zanuck, and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the professions of Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally keep him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of East India clipper ships in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most of the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small pane windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk, who sometimes steal up to the house to peer in through the dusty panes. These folk say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in each a small piece of lead suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by names such as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations as if in answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again. But Angelo Ricci, Joe Zanuck, and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside that charmed circle of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow whom everybody shunned, and at whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank, who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman, while Mr. Zanuck waited for them and their presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in Ship Street, by the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds. Desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterward. Messrs. Ricci and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone down on the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. They moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned their masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zanuck as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the dead. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously he watched that narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently, he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his true treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Sanic did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or a tapping on the walk inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Sanic had never before noticed the color of that man's eyes. Now he saw they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide had washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Strip Street, or certain especially inhuman cries, probably of a stray animal or migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. I repeat to you, gentlemen, that your inquisition is fruitless. Detain me here forever if you will. Confine or execute me if you must have a victim to propitiate the illusion you call justice. But I can say no more than I have said already. Everything that I can remember, I have told with perfect candor. Nothing has been distorted or concealed, and if anything remains vague, it is only because of the dark cloud which has come over my mind, that cloud and the nebulous nature of the horrors which brought it upon me. Again I say, I do not know what has become of Harley Warren, though I think, almost hope, that he is in peaceful oblivion, if there be anywhere so blessed a thing. It is true that I have for 5 years been his closest friend, and a partial sharer of his terrible researches into the unknown. I will not deny, though my memory is uncertain and indistinct, that this witness of yours may have seen us together, as he says, on the Gainesville Pike, walking towards Big Cypress Swamp at 11:30 on that awful night. That we bore electric lanterns, spades, and a curious coil of wire with attached instruments, I will even affirm, for these things all played a part in the single hideous scene which remains burned into my shaken recollection. But of what followed, and of the reason I was found alone and dazed on the edge of that swamp the next morning, I must insist that I know nothing, save what I have told you over and over again. You say to me that there is nothing in the swamp or near it which could form the setting of that frightful episode. I reply that I know nothing beyond what I saw. Vision or nightmare it may have been. Vision or nightmare I fervently hope it was. Yet it is all my mind retains of what took place in those shocking hours after we left the sight of men. And why Harley Warren did not return, he or his shade, or some nameless thing I cannot describe, alone can tell. As I have said before, the weird studies of Harley Warren were well known to me, and to some extent shared by me. Of his vast collection of strange, rare books on forbidden subjects, I have read all that are written in the languages of which I am a master, but these are few as compared with those in languages I cannot understand. Most, I believe, are in Arabic, and the fiend-inspired book which brought on the end, the book which he carried in his pocket out of the world, was written in characters whose like I never saw elsewhere. Warren would never tell me just what was in that book. As to the nature of our studies, must I say again that I retain no full comprehension? It seems to me rather merciful that I do not, for they were terrible studies, which I pursued more through reluctant fascination than through actual inclination. Warren always dominated me, and sometimes I feared him. I remember how I shuddered at his facial expression on the night before the awful happening, when he talked so incessantly of his theory, why certain corpses never decay, but rest firm and fat in their tombs for 1,000 years. But I do not fear him now, for I suspect that he has known horrors beyond my ken. Now I fear for him. Once more I say I have no clear idea of our object on that night. Certainly it had much to do with something in the book which Warren carried with him, that ancient book in undecipherable characters which had come to him from India a month before. But I swear I do not know what it was that we expected to find. Your witness says he saw us at 11:30 on the Gainesville Pike, headed for Big Cypress Swamp. This is probably true, but I have no distinct memory of it. The picture seared into my soul is of one scene only, and the hour must have been long after midnight, for a waning crescent moon was high in the vaporous heavens. The place was an ancient cemetery, so ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. It was in a deep, damp hollow, overgrown with rank grass, moss, and curious creeping weed, and filled with a vague stench which my idle fancy associated absurdly with rotting stone. On every hand were the signs of neglect and decrepitude, and I seemed haunted by the notion that Warren and I were the first living creatures to invade a lethal silence of centuries. Over the valley's rim, a wan, waning crescent moon peered through the noisome vapors that seemed to emanate from unheard-of catacombs, and by its feeble, wavering beams I could distinguish a repellent array of antique slabs, urns, cenotaphs, and mausolean facades, all crumbling, moss-grown, and moisture-stained, and partly concealed by the gross luxuriance of the unhealthy vegetation. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible necropolis concerns the act of pausing with Warren before a certain half-obliterated sepulchre, and of throwing down some burdens which we seemed to have been carrying. I now observed that I had with me an electric lantern and 2 spades, whilst my companion was supplied with a similar lantern and a portable telephone outfit. No word was uttered, for the spot and the task seemed known to us, and without delay we seized our spades and commenced to clear away the grass, weeds, and drifted earth from the flat, archaic mortuary. After uncovering the entire surface, which consisted of 3 immense granite slabs, we stepped back some distance to survey the charnel scene, and Warren appeared to make some mental calculations. Then he returned to the sepulchre, and using his spade as a lever, sought to pry up the slab lying nearest to a stony ruin which may have been a monument in its day. He did not succeed, and motioned to me to come to his assistance. Finally, our combined strength loosened the stone, which we raised and tipped to one side. The removal of the slab revealed a black aperture from which rushed an effluence of miasmal gases so nauseous that we started back in horror. After an interval, however, we approached the pit again and found the exhalations less unbearable. Our lanterns disclosed the top of a flight of stone steps, dripping with some detestable ichor of the inner earth, and bordered by moist walls encrusted with niter. And now, for the first time, my memory records verbal discourse, Warren addressing me at length in his mellow tenor voice, a voice singular unperturbed by our awesome surroundings. "I'm sorry to have to ask you to stay on the surface," he said, "but it would be a crime to let anyone with your frail nerves go down there. You can't imagine, even from what you have read and from what I've told you, the things I shall have to see and do. It's fiendish work, Carter, and I doubt if any man without ironclad sensibilities could ever see it through and come up alive and sane. I don't wish to offend you, and heaven knows I'd be glad enough to have you with me, but the responsibility is in a certain sense mine, and I couldn't drag a bundle of nerves like you down to a probable death or madness. I tell you, you can't imagine what the thing is really like, but I promise to keep you informed over the telephone of every move. You see I have enough wire here to reach the center of the earth and back." I can still hear, in memory, those coolly spoken words, and I can still remember my remonstrances. I seemed desperately anxious to accompany my friend into those sepulchral depths, yet he proved inflexibly obdurate. At one time, he threatened to abandon the expedition if I remained insistent, a threat which proved effective, since he alone held the key to the thing. All this I can still remember, though I no longer know what manner of thing we sought. After he had secured my reluctant acquiescence in his design, Warren picked up the reel of wire and adjusted the instruments. At his nod, I took one of the latter and seated myself upon an aged, discolored gravestone, closely by the new uncovered aperture. Then he shook my hand, shouldered the coil of wire, and disappeared within that indescribable ossuary. For a moment, I kept sight of the glow of his lantern and heard the rustle of the wire as he laid it down after him, but the glow soon disappeared abruptly, as if a turn in the stone staircase had been encountered, and the sound died away almost as quickly. I was alone, yet bound to the unknown depths by those magic strands whose insulated surface lay green beneath the struggling beam of that waning crescent moon. In the lone silence of that hoary and deserted city of the dead, my mind conceived the most ghastly fantasies and illusions, and the grotesque shrines and monoliths seemed to assume a hideous personality, a half-sentience. Amorphous shadows seemed to lurk in the darker recesses of the weed-choked hollow, and to flit, as in some blasphemous ceremonial procession, past the portals of the moldering tombs in the hillside, shadows which could not have been cast by that pallid, peering crescent moon. I constantly consulted my watch by the light of my electric lantern, and listened with feverish anxiety at the receiver of the telephone, but for more than a quarter of an hour heard nothing. Then a faint clicking came from the instrument, and I called down to my friend in a tense voice. Apprehensive as I was nevertheless unprepared for the words which came up from that uncanny vault, in accents more alarmed and quivering than any I had heard before from Harley Warren. He who had so calmly left me a little while previously now called from below in a shaky whisper more portentous than the loudest shriek.
God, if you could see what I'm seeing!
I could not answer, speechless. I could only wait. Then came the frenzied tones again.
Carter, it's terrible, monstrous, unbelievable!
This time my voice did not fail me, and I poured into the transmitter a flood of excited questions. Terrified, I continued to repeat,
Warren, what is it? What is it?
Once more came the voice of my friend, still hoarse with fear, and now apparently tinged with despair.
I can't tell you, Carter. It's too utterly beyond thought. I dare not tell you. No man could know of it and live. Great God, I never dreamed of this.
Stillness again, save for my now incoherent torrent of shuddering inquiry. Then came the voice of Warren in a pitch of wilder consternation.
Carter, for the love of God, put back the slab and get out of this if you can. Quick, leave everything else and make for the outside. It's your only chance. Do as I say, and don't ask me to explain.
I heard, yet was able to only repeat my frantic questions. Around me were the tombs and the darkness and the shadows. Below me, some peril beyond the radius of human imagination. But my friend was in greater danger than I, and through my fear I felt a vague resentment that he should deem me capable of deserting him under such circumstances. More clicking, and after a pause, a piteous cry from Warren.
Beat it! For God's sake, put back the slab and beat it, Carter!
Something in the boyish slang of my evidently stricken companion unleashed my faculties. I formed and shouted a resolution.
Warren, brace up, I'm coming down.
But at this offer, the tone of my auditor changed to a scream of utter despair.
Don't! You can't understand. It's too late, and my own fault. Put back the slab and run. There's nothing else you or anyone can do now.
The tone changed again, this time acquiring a softer quality, as of hopeless resignation, yet it remained tense through anxiety for me.
Quick, before it's too late.
I tried not to heed him, tried to break through the paralysis which held me, and to fulfill my vow to rush down to his aid, but his next whisper found me still held inert in the chains of stark horror.
Carter, hurry. It's no use. You must go. Better one than two. The slab.
A pause, more clicking, than the faint voice of Warren.
Nearly over now. Don't make it harder. Cover up those damn steps and run for your life. You're losing time. So long, Carter. Won't see you again.
Here, Warren's whisper swelled into a cry that gradually rose to a shriek fraught with all the horror of the ages.
Curse these hellish things! Legions! My God! Beat it! Beat it! Beat it!
After that was silence. I know not how many interminable aeons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling, screaming into that telephone. Over and over again through those aeons I whispered and muttered, called, shouted, and screamed. Warren! Warren! Answer me! Are you there? And then there came to me the crowning horror of all, the unbelievable, unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing. I have said that aeons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning, that only my own cries now broke the hideous silence. But after a while there was a further clicking in the receiver, and I strained my ears to listen. Again I called down, Warren, are you there? And in my answer heard the thing which has brought this cloud over my mind. I do not try, gentlemen, to account for that thing, that voice, nor can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reaches to the time of my awakening in the hospital. Shall I say that the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was the end of my experience, and is the end of my story. I heard it, and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery, in the hollow, amidst the crumbling stones and the falling tombs, the rank vegetation and the miasmal vapors. Heard it well up from the innermost depths of that damnable open sepulchre, as I watched amorphous, necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what it said. You fool! Warren is dead. The following is a very true experience. I've never actually wrote this down before, and I don't know if anyone has experienced this too. This happened between 1989 and 1990, and I was about the age of 4 years old. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it, and I wonder if in some way unknown, it changed me. My parents had a house in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and at the time, my brother hadn't been born yet, so I was still the only child. To give you a layout, my parents' house was a 2-story house located in a cul-de-sac. On the bottom floor, there was 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, and the kitchen. The second floor was just the master bedroom and a bath. All you could see from the street was the garage and one of the bedroom windows on the bottom floor, and the window of my mom's bathroom on the second floor. To get to the front door, you had to walk along the cement pathway that ran alongside the house. You had to pass the first bedroom that you can see from the street, then you passed the bathroom window, and then another bedroom window, and then you would be at the front door. The backyard was beyond that point. My bedroom at the time was the bedroom next to the front door. Now, for some reason, my blinds weren't completely down to the bottom of the window. There was about a 6-inch gap with nothing covering it. I was pretty young, so I didn't really care much about it then. The bed was in the middle of the wall across from my bedroom door, and to the left was the window. According to my mom, this all happened right before midnight. My mother was asleep in her room upstairs, and my dad was a policeman that worked nights in another city. I was fast asleep in my room, and out of nowhere I suddenly awoke, looking up at the ceiling. I don't know what woke me, or if I just popped awake on my own. After my eyes adjusted to the night's light of my bedroom, I sat up and started looking around my room. All of a sudden, something caught my eye at the window, in the gap. First, I thought it was the streetlight reflecting on the window, but I knew for a fact that there was only one streetlight, and what I was looking at was 2 obvious glowing spots that were spaced apart as if on someone's face. Then, I thought, is that a cat looking at me? And yes, I vividly remember thinking these things, trying to debunk this at 4 years old. I had remembered then that my cat Chelsea's eyes would reflect at night, but this looked different than that. The cat's eyes would almost have different colors when reflecting. These were 2 very solid, bright white glowing eyes, looking straight at me. I just stared at them, frozen stiff, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. I couldn't see a face at all. The eyes were just so bright nothing else stood out. That void or face around the eyes looked blacker than the night. I thought again, well, if this is a cat, how could a cat be big like a person, and why would a cat stand up to stare in my bedroom? The curiosity got me, and I went for it. I flipped my covers off, turned my little 4-year-old body toward the window, and put my feet on the floor. This is the moment the creepiest thing happened, and it will forever be burned into my brain. I got off the bed and got on my knees to get a closer look at this so-called cat. When at this very moment, this faceless pair of glowing white eyes begins to slowly and steadily tilt to the side, very similar to Michael Myers in Halloween. Eyes still locked on me. Not blinking once. The feeling of dread and fear shot through my body. Completely terrified, I bursted into tears immediately and booked it down the hallway, through the living room and up the stairs to tell my mom. Although I was going as fast as I could, it felt like it took forever. When I got to my mom, I was so upset I couldn't get any words out. Tears were streaming down my face and my mom was becoming seriously concerned at that point. She was able to calm me down just enough for me to get out the words. There's white eyes looking at me through my window, on the bottom. Stutter crying hard. Are you sure? My mom asked. I cried out, yes. She didn't even go down to look. She just called the police. I don't remember the time it took for them to arrive, or what they said, because I finally fell asleep in my mom's bed. I do remember faintly waking up to the knock on the door and my mom going to open it. The cop speaks to her, and I hear her say, "Okay, thank you, good night," and she shuts the door. "Did they find it, Mommy?" I asked, half asleep. "No, honey. He said they couldn't find anyone," my mom told me softly. "It's okay now. Just try to go back to sleep." It's safe to say that the next day, my whole window was covered. Years fast forward, and I'm in middle school now. Every now and then, I would think about that night. Sometimes I wondered if that moment was real, if those eyes were really there. Those unforgettable white eyes. One day, a random thought came up, and I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She tells me, yes, of course, why? "I don't know, just wondering, I guess," I said. Then my mom proceeds to say, "Well, I never told you this, but when the deputy came out that night, he told me they made a priority to get out to our house as soon as they could, because not very long before I called 911, they received another call from someone else reporting that someone was looking in their window, in our same neighborhood." Hearing that sent chills down my spine, and to this day, I wonder who, or what, was looking at me that night.